hotspot suburbs could be put into lockdown as coronavirus cases surge.
This is very serious and we all need to take note.
Also ahead, a South Australian magistrate is arrested following an ICAC investigation. Multiple people are dead after shots were fired at the Pakistan Stock Exchange. And the AFL fixture thrown into disarray as Queensland imposes quarantine rules on players. Hello and welcome to ABC News. I'm Gemma Veness. And first to some breaking news out of Pakistan, where gunmen have attacked a stock exchange building, killing several people. These are the live pictures from the southern port city of Karachi, and here is what we know so far. 4 gunmen tried to storm the stock exchange building in the city's financial district shortly after 9 o'clock in the morning local time. The men used firearms and grenades in the attack. At least 2 civilians have been killed and many more have been injured. Security forces arrived at the scene shortly after. All 4 attackers were killed. A bomb disposal squad was also called to the scene. So, as we say, this is the live shot, and that is the silver Corolla that has been named by police as the vehicle that the 4 attackers arrived in. Now, the building that they've attacked, the stock exchange, is in a high security zone. It also houses the head offices of many private banks there. As we heard, the bomb disposal squad has been called in. They're trying to clear the building of explosive devices. We've seen some forensics there with the car. Many videos have been shared online of this, and the local television stations there showed police in full body armour surrounding this building outside the compound of the stock exchange. And Pakistan, of course, has been plagued by Islamist militant violence, but the attacks have become less frequent in recent years. And there were accounts heard from those inside the stock exchange that they did have to huddle inside their offices. And this exchange is Pakistan's largest and oldest stock exchange. We'll have more on that as it comes to hand. Victoria is experiencing an upward trend in coronavirus infections, with 75 new cases identified overnight. The latest cases are concentrated in the 10 Melbourne suburbs identified as community transmission hotspots. Now, authorities will review the results of a testing blitz before deciding whether local restrictions are needed. Stephanie Ferrier has the details.
Victoria's Health Minister Jenny Mikakos and the Chief Health Officer of Victoria, Professor Brett Sutton, have revealed that there are now 75 new cases of coronavirus across Victoria. Just one of those is a returned international traveller currently in hotel quarantine. 14 are linked to known outbreaks. There are 37 that were detected through routine testing in the community, and 23 remain under investigation. Now, Ms Mikakos says that they find these figures very concerning and they are alarmed at the upward trend in the numbers, and they will be monitoring these very carefully. Now, Professor Brett Sutton says that he does believe that these cases will get worse. The situation will get worse before it gets better. He says that in terms of any lockdowns for these 10 suburban hotspots, which we have seen being the subject of a testing blitz here in Melbourne, that nothing at this stage is off the table, but also nothing has been locked in as yet. He says that any decision to enforce any lockdowns or stay-at-home orders across these 10 suburbs would have to be proportionate. And let's have a listen to what he had to say when asked about potential lockdowns coming up.
We know what the consequences are of a lockdown in terms of fatigue of people's behaviours. We don't want to drive people out of suburban areas into new unaffected areas. So there's a balancing act in terms of making the call on a lockdown. We know that it's a real challenge for businesses. It's a real challenge for people in their homes if that's what's required, but it's absolutely an option, and we flagged the possibility of using it, and we'll use it if it's required.
Jenny Mikakos says that the majority of the positive cases relate to those suburban priority areas. Now, she did say that there have been a number of cases that have been picked up amongst school children. Of course, there is now school holidays, but they are now constantly trying to contact trace people from students that are in Queen of Peace Parish Primary School in Altona, Aitken Hill Primary in Craigieburn in Melbourne's north, Maribyrnong College, Footscray High School in the west, Altaqua College in Truganina, as well as the Port Phillip Specialist School. Now, there have also been 3 new cases that have been linked to security contractors that are already in quarantine from that Stamford Plaza outbreak. That brings that total to 23. There's also been a link established between the so-called North Family Melbourne outbreak, the North Melbourne family outbreak and the Brimbank family outbreak. And there are also a couple of new cases amongst family outbreaks in Patterson Lakes and Listerfields, as well as a new family outbreak in Truganina in Melbourne's west. Now, apart from that, there's also a healthcare worker who has tested positive at the Melbourne Clinic in Richmond, as well as a staff member at the Lifeblood Red Cross processing facility. Now, they are conducting deep cleans at those 2 places and are checking to ensure that they get any close contacts as well to put those people into quarantine. Now, at the moment, one good piece of news is that from previously detected cases, the number of community transmissions has only gone up by 6. So that is when health authorities do not know where the source of the outbreak has come from. Now, apart from that, we're now seeing 288 active cases across Victoria, with 9 people in hospital, 1 of those in intensive care.
Chief Nursing and Midwifery Officer Alison McMillan says Commonwealth authorities are concerned about the infection rate in Victoria, but she has stopped short of declaring it a second wave.
And whilst Victoria is doing an enormous job, and we congratulate them on the effort that they're taking to contain this community spread, it's an important reminder to everyone of the responsibility we all have to keep doing the right thing. So I understand that this morning Minister Hunt has spoken to Minister Makakos in Victoria and has re-emphasised that Commonwealth stands with Victoria in this response, and that we are offering every assistance we can to them should they require it in their response to this. And that if there's anything they need, we will of course come to their aid. We are, of course, as I've just said, taking this very seriously, and we are concerned. And so I'm going to remind everyone, as we have said before, this pandemic is not over. We have seen an enormous achievement in Australia, but now is not the time to be complacent. And so we all need to keep doing the right thing. So I'm going to re-emphasise to everyone that if you are sick, any symptoms whatsoever of a cold or flu, or that loss of taste or smell, please do get tested. Testing is available broadly across the country and is free. You do not need a Medicare card. If you are sick, please stay at home. And this really does mean stay at home. Don't have visitors around, don't go to the shops, and definitely don't go to work, because those are the places and times when you're likely to spread it to other people.
7 new cases of coronavirus have been detected in New South Wales. All of the cases are returned overseas travellers who are in hotel quarantine. It takes the state's confirmed number of infections to 3,184.
I think, as I've said many times now to the New South Wales community, it doesn't pay to be cocky. It doesn't pay to be overly certain of our position, and we've offered help to the Victorians.
3 new cases of coronavirus have been reported in South Australia, ending a 33-day run of no new cases. A 3-year-old girl and 2 women tested positive after arriving on a repatriation flight from Mumbai on Saturday. All 260 people on board the flight have been tested and are in quarantine in an Adelaide hotel.
None of these people have really any symptoms at all. The child has no symptoms, and I'm told that one of the women has some very mild symptoms, and they're all recovering in that isolation facility. And as we've done previously, we have a lot of nursing staff and also GPs involved to make sure that everybody in that facility is being monitored on a daily basis. So if anybody does develop respiratory symptoms, they will get another PCR test. And we also will be testing around about day 12 as people are preparing to leave that quarantine facility. So this takes the number of cases in South Australia to 443. So these are cases we anticipated that we would get, because we know that the rates of COVID-19 are very high in India and that Indian subcontinent. And the Minister, I think, had also predicted this and had spoken to the South Australian public about this as a possibility.
A South Australian magistrate has been arrested following an investigation by the state's corruption watchdog. It's alleged that on 2 occasions last month, Magistrate Harap misrepresented who was driving his government-issued vehicle at the time it was observed committing traffic offences. Richard Davies has more from Adelaide.
Magistrate Harap has been charged with 2 counts of deception, 1 count of conspiracy to commit the offence of abuse of public office, and 1 count of conspiracy to attempt to obstruct or to pervert the course of justice or due administration of the law. Now, this all centres around an allegation that on 2 occasions between the 19th of May and the 22nd of May this year, Magistrate Harap misrepresented who was driving his government vehicle. Now, why this is significant is because that government vehicle was later, well, around that time, was caught breaking the law in traffic offences. And so what seems to have happened is that it's been alleged that Magistrate Harap has said that he was not driving that vehicle and that someone else was driving the vehicle. So what we're learning is that it would be separately alleged that between the 10th of May and the 29th of May of this year also, that Mr Harap conspired with another person to pervert the course of justice. And where it gets even stranger is that the ICAC Commissioner Bruce Lander has said that it's alleged that he conspired to abuse his public office in relation to the matter that was to be heard by him and the matter that was heard by him. So this has obviously been the subject of an investigation for quite many weeks, and there were 5 search warrants actually executed this morning, and that's when Magistrate Harap was arrested. Now, it's quite unusual for the ICAC Commissioner to actually name anyone who's involved in his investigations, but Bruce Lander, I should say, has actually decided to name Magistrate Harap because he said, "I thought not naming the judicial officer would harm the confidence the community necessarily places in the judicial system." Now, this investigation is ongoing and it is anticipated that other charges will be laid and that other persons may be charged. Now, in response to that, the Chief Magistrate of South Australia has issued a statement saying that Magistrate Harap will not sit as a magistrate or conduct any court business until all the matters have been finalised. And she's also directed that Magistrate Harap take leave until the charges against him have been determined, and that it's not appropriate for any magistrate to hear the charges against Magistrate Harap, and has therefore asked the Chief Judge of the District Court to arrange for a judge to hear them. So a lot of intrigue and investigation going on in the courts of South Australia.
The Prime Minister has warned that he will name and shame those institutions that don't sign up to the National Redress Scheme for institutional child sex abuse. Under the scheme, eligible survivors are able to seek a range of redress options, including monetary payments, access to counselling services and a direct personal response from the institutions responsible. But some say the redress scheme itself falls short. Judy Corton is a lawyer representing victims of institutional abuse and joins me now. Judy, a redress scheme was one of the key recommendations of the Royal Commission. Is this scheme honouring that?
Hello, Gemma. No, I don't believe it is. In many senses, it's everything except what the Royal Commission recommended. The Royal Commission recommended a scheme that had a cap of 200,000. This one is a cap of 150,000. The Royal Commission also recommended that equal weight, in other words, for the decision makers working out how much a a person who's going to be offered. They give equal weight to the severity of the impacts of the crimes and the severity of the crimes themselves. We have a scheme now that is based on a hierarchy of abuse. So, you know, brutally speaking, what that means is, unless a child was penetrated, they can only receive 45 or 50,000 of that 150,000 cap amount. So you might have a child who was in an orphanage, no access to family or friends, brutally, sexually, physically and psychologically assaulted by one or more offenders. But if there was no actual penetration, then that child would be, that adult now couldn't receive any more than $50,000. There are multiple concerns with this redress scheme, and I note that our Prime Minister wants to name and shame institutions that have not come on board, and I fully support that. But there needs to be a lot more that the federal government and our state and territory governments need to do to change our current redress scheme so that it does actually reflect the evidence-based and very sound recommendations of the Royal Commission. The other concern, one of the concerns with the redress scheme, the Royal Commission recommended that victims and survivors have access to lifelong counselling as needed. That has also been ignored, and the counselling amounts range from $5,000 if there was penetration right down to $1,200 if not, which is not very many counselling sessions at all. The other concerning element of this scheme is there's sort of a secrecy provision. So the scheme has a set of guidelines for the decision makers. Now, we still don't really know who these decision makers are. They're public servants, but they have a set of policy guidelines, and there is no transparency, because if an unauthorised person was to publish or talk about these guidelines, that's potentially a criminal offence with up to 2 years imprisonment. I mean, that is so contrary to the message from the Royal Commission, which is no more silence, no more secrets and no more silence.
Do we know the numbers that we're talking about, people who will be coming forward with this scheme?
The Royal Commission anticipated or estimated about 60,000 people. How many, I'm not too sure how many have come forward or who have applied. I don't have those numbers at my fingertips. But what's important to remember, and I'll say this to anyone who is considering making a claim or an application, there are now other pathways, legal pathways. The National Redress Scheme is only one of those, and in many ways it should really be the last resort. People need to get proper independent advice, legal advice, to work out whether in fact they otherwise have a claim, a proper civil claim that could be, for example, looking at general pain and suffering damages, economic loss and so on. So there have been a lot of legal reforms in the last 3 or 4 years following our Royal Commission. Up until 2015, nobody in Australia was able to sue any institution because of two main sort of legal impediments. They've now gone in every state and territory, and there is much more, there is more equal access now for survivors and victims to justice in the courts, if that's the way they wish to go.
Yeah, so independent advice critical there. And also many survivors are in jail, so does that affect their eligibility or the processing of any payment?
This is one of the other major concerns, is that for a lot of people, not a majority, but for a lot, when they're badly and seriously sexually assaulted as children, they naturally go off the rails and may end up in trouble with the police. So once they're in prison for a certain period of time, no, they cannot apply for the National Redress Scheme, which really, once again, does not make sense. I would have to say the policies underlying the National redress scheme as we have it, they are not evidence-based, they are not sound, they don't take into account the now well-known psychiatric harm and many other impacts of a person who is badly assaulted, or sexually assaulted, I should say, as a child.
Lawyer Judy Corton, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
New South Wales Labor MP Shiket Moselmain says he has not done anything wrong following allegations Chinese government agents had infiltrated his office. Speaking for the first time since last week's raids of his home and office, Mr Moselmain says he's not a suspect in the investigation. For more, here's Ashley Raper.
Shiket Moselmain came to Parliament today really to profess his innocence, and he said that he is in fact not a suspect in this joint investigation between ASIO and the Australian Federal Police into Chinese government infiltration and influence here in his office. Now, this is the first time that we have heard from Shiket Moselmain since those federal agents raided his home and office on Friday over those allegations of Chinese influence. Now, he says he has done nothing wrong, that yes, he is not a suspect, but he also says that he will take a leave of absence from Parliament while this investigation continues. As he spoke to the media, he just gave a statement, he didn't take questions, but in his statement too, he defended comments that he's made in the past which are pro-China. He said it's a democracy, that he's allowed to express his views, and those views aren't out of line with other people in the Australian Chinese community or in fact elsewhere in the world. So he was very strong. He will not be resigning, but he will take a leave of absence from Parliament, which means he won't sit in Parliament. He said he won't even enter the building, that he won't go into his office here in Macquarie Street until this investigation wraps up.
I am under no illusion that this is a serious investigation. The first of its kind. Precedents will be set and lives changed. Sadly, the political lynching has already commenced. Let me tell you, I have done nothing wrong. I have done nothing wrong. I have never jeopardized the welfare of our country and our people.
Shiket Moselmain has been under intense pressure over the past couple of days to resign and not sit in the chamber. Yesterday, his Labor leader, Jodie McKay, said that when Parliament resumes in August, it's now a winter break, that they would move a motion to suspend him from the Parliament, meaning that he wouldn't be able to sit in the chamber. That came after the government the day before threatened to take the same action. So really today, Shiket Moselmain has taken it upon himself to take a leave of absence so that he wasn't subject to that suspension motion. Now, he's already been suspended from the Labor Party while this investigation goes. He hasn't been expelled, he's just been suspended while this investigation continues. So even so, he's not going to be in Labor caucus meetings, and if he was to sit in the Parliament, which he's not now, but he wouldn't have been a member of the Labor Party at this moment because he has been suspended. So for now, Shiket Moselmain, we've heard he's just returned home after being here, and that's where he'll stay. He won't be back in this building now until this investigation by ASIO and the Australian Federal Police wraps up.
An investigation is underway after a teacher at a New South Wales high school went on a racist rant in front of students. Liz Farquhar has the details.
Hunter Valley Indigenous woman Mary Franks says her 14-year-old daughter Alora was in class at Singleton High School last week discussing diversity when the teacher made comments that Aboriginal people were criminals and dole bludgers. She says her daughter was horrified.
The Aboriginal students in the class were quite affected. They've all walked up out of the room crying, really, really upset, you know, because this has been going on for too long. But my daughter, she stopped at that door and she just turned around in front of her peers and walked back up to that teacher and said, no, this is not right.
You don't expect that to come out of a teacher, especially with all the Black Lives Matter right now. You just don't expect that.
The school has told the ABC the comments were immediately followed up with the school's anti-racism contact officer and with the family, but Mary Franks says she's not satisfied.
I called the school on Friday morning to ask what was going on, what procedures have been put in place to protect my daughter, and I was pretty much told, yeah, they're going to do some courses and they're going to, you know, implement some new strategies in the school and talk to the teachers. But Alora can go sit at the back in the girls' academy while the teacher continues to teach class.
So she's been pulled out of the classroom?
Yeah, because that's Alora's choice. Alora doesn't want to go to class. She can go sit up the back.
The teacher has apologised to the class for her comments, and the school says it prides itself on its strong history of support for Indigenous communities. It says the school and education department do not condone racism in any form.
There have been changes to the AFL season following a spike in coronavirus cases in Victoria. The Queensland Government has changed their quarantine requirements for AFL players to restrict interactions with Melbourne teams. Queensland-based teams who play in Melbourne or against a Melbourne-based team in Queensland must now quarantine for 14 days after the match.
And all our decision making and the development of our strict protocols has been anchored in the advice of government and the Chief Health Officers, and will continue to do so. We also said at the start of this season that it will be a season like no other, and that we're going to have to be flexible and agile throughout this season in order to play all 144 games for the season plus finals that remain when we resumed. It's why we changed the length of quarters and reduced the length of the season.
ABC grandstand commentator Tony Armstrong says that the AFL has its work cut out as it attempts to reschedule matches in the face of these new quarantine rules.
This weekend is set. We know that for sure. They'll go ahead with the Gold Coast coming down here to Melbourne, but that now means that the Gold Coast, of course, will have to either go into quarantine for 14 days when they return to Queensland or stay down and complete their matches. So after this weekend, well, not after this weekend, as of right now, the AFL is scrambling to try to work out how the rest of the season looks.
So do you think that there's a chance the Victorian teams will move out of the state, I should say, or is it more likely that the interstate teams would move into Victoria?
Well, we seem to be the COVID capital at the moment, and with Collingwood and Geelong looking to already go over to WA for that hub in a couple of weeks, it seems more likely that we will go to any of the states or territories outside Victoria. Gil McLachlan did say that earlier on today at his press conference.
He also was appearing pretty positive about it, saying that the clubs are dealing with their scheduling crisis well. Do you think that is the case, though?
I guess it's in everyone's best interests to get a season out, play the remainder of the 118 games, and you know we've got the big broadcast deal and all of these kind of commercial levers that all of the clubs are working towards, and we know that the season's already going to be run at a loss. So whilst it's not ideal, whilst clubs want to be playing in front of their own fans and they want to be playing in their home states and sleeping in their own beds, these are some of I guess the sacrifices that these teams and clubs have to make.
Yeah, and we saw Mark McGowan just a moment ago already volunteering to hold the grand final in Perth. Do you think it will be at the MCG though this year?
Well, there is a contract with the MCG to hold the grand final there until 2057, right. which is quite a long time. However, it looks more and more unlikely that we will have crowds at that stadium given the recent spike in COVID-19. So that's still right up in the air, and the AFL is definitely copying a fair bit of pressure to be able to play that grand final in front of a crowd.
It's time for the weather now with Graham Creed. Graham, what's the latest on these severe conditions in the southwest?
They are slowly starting to ease, Gemma. The warning itself now has contracted to the far southern coastal areas. And even there, it's the areas around Esperance that are seeing the strongest of the wind gusts at the moment. A recent gust to around 70 kilometres per hour in association with that change. We can see how that warning area is contracting into those southern regions, and it's likely to be removed as we head in towards this evening. It's not the end of the fronts, though. There's still another one to come through. Now, this will roll in overnight Tuesday and into Wednesday. We are expecting and gusty winds with that system. It doesn't look anywhere near as strong as the one that moved through over the last day or so, though. And then we see a high pressure system become the dominant feature. Now, we've also got some onshore winds along the east coast. We've seen some showers in parts of Sydney because of all the moisture that's now sitting in the lower parts of the atmosphere. Clear skies overnight and also cooler temperatures. We're also looking at light winds. We're expecting to see some fairly widespread fog through Sydney. May even start to push towards the coastal fringe. And those light winds are underneath this high pressure system. So through many parts of the southeast, we're expecting to see some frosty and foggy conditions. The front will start to move towards South Australia, but it weakens and gets pushed further south by the high pressure system. So any shower activity with that is expected to remain mostly coastal or perhaps up into the Mount Lofty ranges. And we're not expecting to see overly strong winds associated with it. We've got that next front moving through the southwest of Western Australia, so still some showers for Perth. These are likely to pick up as we move through the afternoon. And we've got a possibly foggy start to the day for Sydney. And then as we move into Wednesday, we've still got an onshore wind flow along the Queensland coast. That next front will be a little bit stronger as it heads up towards the southeastern states, so freshening northerly winds, and that'll actually lead to some mild temperatures for this time of year. But we're also expecting to see showers on the increase. We're looking at a warm day for Brisbane and Sydney.
You can keep up to date at news.abc.net.au and on iView. Here are our top stories on ABC News. Victoria's Chief Health Officer hasn't ruled out imposing lockdowns on Melbourne's hotspot suburbs, saying nothing is off the table for getting the outbreak under control. The state has recorded 75 new cases overnight, which is the highest daily total since March. Just one is a returned traveller in hotel quarantine. A South Australian magistrate has been charged with multiple offences after a corruption investigation. It's alleged that on 2 occasions last month, Magistrate Robert Harrop misrepresented who was driving his government-issued vehicle at the time it was observed committing traffic offences. At least 2 people have been killed when gunmen attacked the Pakistan Stock Exchange. 4 gunmen tried to storm the building in Karachi's financial district just after 9 a.m. local time. At least 2 civilians were killed and multiple people injured. Security forces say all 4 attackers have been killed. And the AFL has reshuffled its fixture after the Queensland Government tightened restrictions on players in response to Victoria's surge in cases. Under the new rules, players will have to quarantine on return from Melbourne, and they'd also be required to isolate after playing against Melbourne teams or teams that were recently in the city. So Victoria has recorded another 75 cases of coronavirus in the state. Here's Casey Briggs with more on the facts and figures in Australia and also overseas. Casey, how concerning are these figures out of Victoria?
Yeah, afternoon, Gemma. It's a lot. There's no two ways about it. I'm not surprised that the numbers of cases, the daily number that we're getting out of Victoria went up today, but it did go up by a lot. 75 is the 4th highest we've seen reported out, 4th highest number we've seen reported out of Victoria in this entire pandemic, and it's up from 49 yesterday. Just to give you an idea of how quickly this growth has been, 75 today, it was 16 last Monday, so that's almost a 5-fold increase. This growth is exponential, and sadly it seems like, from what the Chief Health Officer in Victoria was saying this morning, things are likely to get worse before they get better. As I said, this is the 4th highest individual single day rise in infections in Victoria. But the other thing to remember is the big difference is back then, a lot more cases, a significant portion of cases were coming from overseas. That's not the case anymore. Let me show you what this curve looks like, and I'll colour all of the locally acquired infections in red. You can see the locally acquired infections. We're now actually recording record high numbers of infections in Victoria acquired in Australia. That's one of the problems that we've got. That's what's causing a lot of issues. Well, we're not seeing so far at least, the rates of community transmission, the unknown source infections continue to rise in this sort of pattern as well. There's a couple of reasons for that. One is that most infections, lots of infections are being traced back to these clusters because the testing is being done in these targeted areas. So that's, I guess, one good thing. But the other thing worth remembering there is that there are lots of cases still under investigation, more than 50 of them, I think, from the last few days. So there are a lot of cases that could well still become cases of unknown source. So where do we go from here? Well, contact tracers are getting toward their limit. There are more than 2,500 close contacts of confirmed coronavirus infections at the moment that contact tracers are managing. And Victoria's health chief said this morning that that's pretty close to the limit of what they can manage. So we do run the risk, and these numbers are not going to go to zero overnight, so we do run the risk in the next couple of days of overwhelming those contact tracers. That would be a big problem.
Yeah, and Victoria, rightfully the focus, but what's going on throughout the rest of the country at the same time?
Yes, we can't forget that there are still infections being found across the rest of the country, although Victoria is occupying most of our attention. We have 10 outside Victoria so far today, although Tasmania is unlikely to have any because Tasmania hasn't had any in a very long time. New South Wales 7, all of them are return travellers, all of them overseas acquired, as opposed to none of Victoria's. And the 3 in South Australia, so South Australia's just recorded its first cases today in more than a month. That's a long streak to have broken. The good news is they are, again, all overseas acquired cases. There was a big flight that came in from overseas to Adelaide over the weekend, and so all of those arrivals were tested, and 3 have tested positive to the coronavirus. So I guess that one's not a huge surprise. The South Australian government were expecting these cases, that flight would contain some cases, but it's, I guess, sad for South Australia to see that streak of more than a month end.
And globally, 500,000 people have died, 10 million people have been infected, and they're just the official numbers. The speed at which the virus has spread is really astonishing.
It's truly astonishing, and you're right, these numbers are much higher in reality. These are just the infections and the deaths that we know about at this point in time. 181 days ago was when the first cluster of unusual pneumonia cases were reported in Wuhan, China, to the World Health Organization. In less than 6 months, we've made it to 10 million, sadly. And the rate that this virus is spreading is continuing to grow. We're now seeing 180 or 190,000 cases recorded every day at the moment. So if this pace keeps up, we'll be, after getting to 10 million within 6 months, we'll get to 20 million in another 2.
Casey, thank you. The mayors of 10 Melbourne councils have written to the Prime Minister asking the Commonwealth to urgently increase coronavirus education programs for multicultural communities. The mayors include those from areas identified as hotspots. Councillor Steve Stephanopoulos is Mayor of the City of Stonington. He says simple messages are not being translated into other languages.
It's about not harsher restrictions, but actually having some more education programs out there. We see a community that needs desperately information that's current and up to date in their own language. That's critical for us.
So you think the communication to date has just not been good enough?
It hasn't been good enough. And my parents are a good example where they're relying on their local Greek radio station and newspapers that are produced in Melbourne for current up-to-date information, and they're not seeing it there at all. So I'm the one who has to go there and educate my own parents. And if I have to do that, I can imagine there are thousands and thousands of other people doing the same.
The South Sudanese community was blamed for the outbreak by one media outlet, a claim that was refuted and an apology was issued. But are migrant groups being blamed, and is that fair?
Well, look, migrant groups should not be blamed. They are not at fault here. I mean, the number of people who have been infected across the country are from various different backgrounds, and I think discriminating against or pulling aside one community group ain't going to help the problem.
So, as you mentioned, your parents are Greek, they listen to Greek radio. Tell us about the messages that they're hearing compared to what the rest of society might be getting.
Well, like ABC 24, you know, we're getting the news updates on an hourly basis, and that's great. And they're getting the news updates as well, but they're not getting the education programs, the social distancing requirements, the requirements to not shake hands, not kiss, not hug, not visit other people who are unwell. If you are unwell, if you've got a sniffle or a cold or a cough, to stay at home. Those are simple messages that are not being translated into multitude of languages for all our ethnic communities across Australia to understand.
To what extent are masks being used in the area, and do you think their use is on the rise?
Well, I'm actually seeing a lot more people using masks, but for me, it makes me think that that person might be the one who's infected, not necessarily protecting themselves. So I'm actually staying away from someone who is wearing a mask, because we simply should just be keeping our hands away from our faces and ensuring that our hands are clean and maintaining that social distancing. But I am certainly seeing more people wearing masks and also gloves in the public as well.
Are you noticing any other changes since the hotspots were announced?
Well, I'm actually seeing a lot more people out and about in the streets, and I'm actually, surprisingly enough, seeing a lot more younger people who are actually hugging and kissing each other in the streets. And that, to me, demonstrates that they're not living together as a family unit, but actually seeing each other for the first time in a very long time and not respecting social distancing. I mean, this is really critical and key for everyone to understand. It's not about you, it's about we. We need to ensure that we keep every Australian safe at this time by maintaining social distancing. And if you want to see someone, give them a call, see them from afar, but don't kiss and hug each other in the street. It ain't going to help.
Have you heard of any cases of people being discriminated against, being from your local government area in, say, their workplace, for example?
I haven't, but what concerns me, though, is if there are workplaces that are discriminating against certain religions, certain cultures, certain backgrounds, or even certain people living in different municipalities, that is un-Australian, unacceptable under any circumstances. We are all Aussies. We're here to maintain a collective good for everyone. We just need to pull through together, as the Prime Minister and the Premier have been saying for weeks and months on end. You can't blame one group over another.
And the Chief Medical Officer says that nothing's off the table in terms of getting this outbreak under control. Are you aware of what's being considered?
Unfortunately, local government in the inner city of Melbourne isn't being informed. We find out through you on ABC 24 and other media outlets.
Regional airline Rex plans to launch flights between Sydney, Melbourne and Brisbane next year, which will see it compete with Qantas and Virgin Australia. The board of Rex has approved plans to raise $30 million to fund the expansion, which will include an initial fleet of 5 to 10 aircraft based out of Sydney or Melbourne. Rex currently operates a network of regional flights to 60 destinations. Jordan Chong is an aviation journalist currently writing for Orient Aviation, and he joins me now. Jordan, Rex hasn't flown between the capitals before now. Seeing an opportunity here?
I think so, Gemma. Hi. I think because they have such an extensive regional network, I mean, they fly close to 100,000 passengers every month on their regional services. I guess they see a potential demand there to, link up some of the capital cities that they operate regional services from. And I guess as the Rex Deputy Chairman said today, they think it's more an incremental addition to the network rather than, any sort of great expansion, especially, in the current environment.
But investors have certainly seen an opportunity, the share price shooting up to pre-pandemic levels after obviously being smashed.
Well, I think they see, I mean, the share market is particularly volatile right now, but speaking to today's share price movement, I guess the Rex statement noted that there have been lots of people interested in, helping the company raise the necessary equity to fund this expansion that they have. Whether that's they're looking to raise $30 million, and as investors, they potentially see an opportunity there. So I guess that does tend to explain the share price movement.
Who owns Rex?
Well, it's a company that's listed on the Australian Stock Exchange. So there are mum and dads and superannuation funds and investment funds and whatnot. But I think the majority ownership is held by Singaporean interests. Rex's chairman, Mr. Lim Kim Hai, he owns a fair chunk of the airline himself. So, it's a mix of Australian and Singaporean investors, mum and dad investors and institutional investors.
And would you say the airline is well resourced?
I would say that the airline, has a very robust, extensive network. It's got, it's got infrastructure at all the capital city airports that it plans to fly these domestic services from. It's got very experienced staff. Operationally, it runs a very strong and efficient operation. You can see it through their on-time performance. And, an airline that flies, roughly 100,000 passengers a month, that's more than $1 million a year on 60 destinations. Often those destinations are not served by anyone else other than Rex. You have to say that they have a strong base in which to sort of start these services.
The board of Rex has approved plans to raise $30 million to fund this expansion. They'll have to buy new planes, I suppose.
Well, I guess we'll have to wait and see as to how they decide to acquire the aircraft. They may choose to buy aircraft. That's quite an expensive capital investment, especially when you consider that the initial fleet will only be for 5 to 10 aircraft. So they might instead choose to lease aircraft, and with a lot of aircraft not flying at the moment because of the coronavirus pandemic, lessors should have a lot of spare aircraft available to acquire for Rex to acquire. And at this stage, it looks like they want to fly narrow body aircraft, so the passenger experience should be similar to what the current airlines flying between Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane are offering. Narrow body aircraft with somewhere between 160 and 180 seats, and I think Rex has mentioned that they want to offer some food and some checked baggage and some amenities. So there are a lot of options in terms of how they wish to acquire the aircraft, what aircraft they might want to choose in terms of that narrow body fleet. So between now and March, when they plan to start, they'll have to make all these decisions.
And importantly, aviation staff have been really hit hard by the pandemic. Will Rex be likely employing more?
Hard to say at this stage. I guess, Rex mentioned in its statement today that they have a lot of the infrastructure at the capital city airports already. I mean, they already fly from Sydney to a number of regional destinations, similar situation in Brisbane and Melbourne. But with extra flying activity, one would think that they would need additional staff, particularly, I guess, if you think about the way pilots and cabin crew are licensed. Pilots and cabin crew are licensed to operate, fly, work in particular aircraft. So Rex could choose to get their existing cabin crew skilled and certified to operate these narrow-body aircraft, or they could hire new pilots and new cabin crew and new handlers to operate these narrow-body aircraft. So yes, there is some potential, depending on the scale and the nature of their operation, for people to have new employment opportunities through this expansion that Rex is undertaking.
Aviation journalist Jordan Chong, thanks for chatting to us.
Thanks, Gemma, anytime.
Tens of thousands of foreign workers in Lebanon have been abandoned by their employers due to the country's spiralling economic crisis. Many are maids from Ethiopia, and because of coronavirus border closures, they've got no way of getting home. Middle East correspondent Eric Torchek reports.
Before the financial crisis, these women were cleaners and nannies for Lebanon's elite. Now, kicked out of their jobs and accommodation, they're sleeping on the street outside their embassy in Beirut.
I don't have a residency permit, I don't have my passport, no money, only this bag. I've got nothing and I don't know what to do.
Lebanon's rich and middle class have been hit hard by a currency crash and the collapse of the country's financial system. They can no longer afford the domestic workers from overseas and have kicked them out of their homes, sometimes violently.
He hit me, then I ran away. I'm so scared he might kill me. I left everything I have behind and I ran away.
The workers are bound to a specific employer under a system known as kafala that's exempt from Lebanon's labour laws.
The kafala system allows you to completely control the worker and the life and the freedom of the worker that works at your house, which turns the workers into slaves.
The kafala system had a bad reputation even before this current crisis, with many workers reporting abuse and mistreatment, and some even turning up dead. Now, these workers who've been dumped can't even leave the country. The airport is closed because of the coronavirus. The financial meltdown has sent the price of food and other essential items soaring, sparking violent protests. Many Lebanese are struggling, as well as 1.5 million refugees from neighbouring Syria. But the crisis has exposed the cruel reality behind the lavish lifestyles of many Lebanese, and these workers are the first casualties of the crash. Eric Torchek, ABC News, Jerusalem.
The US president says he wasn't briefed on reports that Russia paid Taliban-linked militants to kill American troops because the intelligence community did not find the information credible. A story in the New York Times alleges a Russian military unit offered cash rewards for successful attacks last year on US and coalition soldiers in Afghanistan. Donald Trump tweeted that he and his close aides were not briefed on any such intelligence, a move described as unusual by Trump's former national security advisor, John Bolton.
I've never recalled a circumstance where the president himself goes out of his way to say he wasn't briefed on something.
Russia's foreign ministry has dismissed the report. Let's return now to our breaking news out of Pakistan, where gunmen have attacked a stock exchange building, killing several people there. These are the live pictures from the southern port city of Karachi. And here's what we know so far. 4 gunmen tried to storm the stock exchange building in the city's financial district shortly after 9 o'clock in the morning local time. The men used firearms and grenades in the attack. At least 2 civilians were killed and many more were injured. Security forces arrived at the scene shortly after and all 4 attackers were killed. A bomb disposal squad was also called to the scene. As the restrictions ease and more people return to the outdoors, we're being warned to keep an eye out for snakes. Alice Springs resident snake catcher says it's a common myth they go into hibernation during the winter months.
One of the last things you want to come across when you're digging in a backyard is a snake. But that's exactly what happened for 3 Alice Springs workers.
Yeah, Tim came across a snake with the excavator, kind of tipped it and it came straight out the hole, and yeah, lucky it didn't injure the snake at all.
He was pretty placid. He was just rolled up in a ball there, and he didn't even move. Like, we were standing looking at him for a few minutes.
And it wasn't just any old snake, it was a western brown, one of Australia's many deadly species. Seeking shelter in what turned out to be a spider's hole, the snake was successfully extracted and taken away.
Yeah, definitely.
I was very surprised.
Because, yeah, it's freezing cold this morning. I'm surprised I even got out of its hole.
They're turning up in other places too.
I only spoke to a bloke 2 days ago. He was out bike riding and he was on his mountain bike and a snake shot across the path and it was that big.
Days before catching the western brown, he was also called to catch a juvenile mulga snake, also known as a king brown. He says the snake was probably only a month old, which means it's hatched unusually late in the year.
I presume probably because of the extreme dry weather last year, and it was reported by other keepers and other catchers across Australia that they've been seeing juveniles and having late hatchings.
And it's likely the young snakes are more active as they try to get food to survive over winter and are more easily able to warm up their bodies than adults.
So if they're sheltering under just a little bit of tin, it's easier for them to wake up than a big snake with a big body that has to wake up a whole big body compared to a small one.
A friendly reminder that it's not just the cold that can bite over winter. Mitchell Abram, ABC News, Alice Springs.
Now for the sports news with Louise Ransom. Lou, it's been a busy day in AFL, to say the least.
Yes.
Now a couple of fines handed out by the match review officer.
Yes, we heard from Tony Armstrong earlier about all the issues around the COVID-19 situation. Let's take you through really quickly those 2 charges. So Riley O'Brien from the Adelaide Crows has been charged with rough conduct. He can accept a $1,000 sanction with an early plea. And Jai Simpkin from North Melbourne, he's been charged with striking. He can accept a $750 sanction with an early plea. So just tick those ones off for today.
Yep. And in the NRL, some teams returning to their home grounds.
Yeah, that's right. So news just in the NRL, Manly have been given permission to return to Lotto Land. So good news for them. This is to do with the COVID-19 situation. They were using Central Coast Stadium as their base since round 3, so they'll go home. They host the Knights at Brookvale on Sunday afternoon. The Raiders have had to travel to Sydney for their home games since the round 3 resumption as well. They've been cleared to return to their stadium in Canberra. And Friday's clash against the Dragons will be the first game in Canberra since round 1, and the Titans are back at their home ground too. They have been playing at Suncorp Stadium, so they go back to Carrara on the Gold Coast.
And good news for rugby too today in WA.
Yeah, that's right. So Twiggy Forrest, Andrew Forrest, has pledged $5 million to grassroots rugby in Western Australia. We know what a great supporter he is of rugby in that state, and one of the ambassadors for the program's not a bad name to have involved is all former Wallaby captain David Pocock, and David joins us live now from Canberra. David, good afternoon to you. Tell us a little bit about the program and why did you want to be involved?
Hey Lou, thanks for having me. Yeah, I think it's a great initiative. You know, Andrew and Nicola Forrest are great supporters of rugby in Western Australia, and this program will target young boys and girls to give them opportunities to play the game, and they're obviously involved in higher levels in West Australian rugby to try and create a bit of a pathway, professional pathway for them down the track.
And you spent a lot of your career in Perth playing for the Western Force. I know you'd be pretty pleased to see them sort of back in the conversation in Australia. How important is the support from Twiggy for rugby in that state?
It's huge, and you know that was a big part of why I volunteered to be part of the program. Was the Western Force gave me an amazing opportunity as a 17-year-old, and in the 7 years I was in Perth, I saw the game grow, and you know, this kind of pledge to grassroots, to give boys and girls the opportunity to challenge themselves, be part of a team, make some great friends. Hopefully we'll see more of these initiatives in rugby going forward.
So Super Rugby in Australia starts again this weekend after the break for the coronavirus shutdown. The Force are involved. What's your view in what Super Rugby looks like going forward after this year, David?
I think this year is a great opportunity to start to build Australian rugby, to have a local competition, really, you know, build up the grassroots support for rugby again, and go from there. Really excited to see the Western Force back in the comp after a few years, and I think we're going to see some really competitive rugby. I know the players that I've spoken to are certainly itching to get back out there after a very extended pre-season.
What about a trans-Tasman model? Should we include our Kiwi partners?
I think that's something that can come down the track. You know, I think initially the round robin within Australia will give guys an opportunity to push for Wallaby selection, and I think also really get local rugby clubs involved. And you know, one of the silver linings, I guess, is potentially having a lot more Australian players being able to play club at the end of the Super Rugby season.
Yeah, I think you're right. David Pocock, thanks so much for your time here on the ABC. Really appreciate it. So David Pocock there, former Wallaby captain. Great to have him involved in rugby in some way, shape or form. Gemma?
Yeah, great news. All right, thanks Lou. And remember, you can keep up to date at news.abc.net.au and on iView. And stay with us here on ABC News. We have Karina Carvalho up next with more on our top stories.
Whenever you want, wherever you are, know the story with ABC News, the most trusted news source. Get breaking updates with live notifications and access the latest news and information.
Identified as coronavirus hotspots.
Go to abc.net.au or download the ABC News app. Tonight, Heather journeys to the central Queensland town of Biloela.
These people are very resilient. They want to succeed.
Where they embrace hard work and new beginnings, no matter where you come from.
This is just the way Biloela does things.
There's a lot of good people in Biloela.
Yeah.
Backroads, tonight at 8 on ABC and iView. What is positive? A full charge? An approval? A good rating? Positive is more than just a symbol. It's a state of mind, and the addition of little things can equal a big difference to your mental well-being. From July 5, ABC will share tips, strategies and stories on TV, radio and online to demonstrate how a small change can make a big difference. ABC, your mental health. For more, go to abc.net.au.
I am your president of law and order.
Over 100,000 deaths due to COVID cases.
As the United States endures a year from hell.
Take it out! Take it out!
How are they going to make America safe, united, prosperous, equal, great again?
Here's what we know.
Join Chaz and John for in-depth analysis of the state of the states.
It's easy to forget the pandemic is still around.
Planet America, Wednesdays at 9:30, ABC and iView.
Tomorrow on News Breakfast, Hamilton. It's the musical that's taken Broadway by storm. Now it's coming to a small screen near you.
And when you're craving simple comfort food, you really can't go past eggs. And our resident foodie is going to tell you how to make the perfect omelette. Don't miss it.
The ABC News Channel has been there for a decade of the big stories.
History being made in a dramatic fashion here at the San Jose mine.
Haiti's capital is a city in ruins.
Millions of gallons of oil spilled into the Gulf of Mexico.